Okay, hey everybody. Thanks for joining in with us. We're going to be continuing in our exercise of commands and traditions. We're doing is really trying to ask ourselves the question, what has God clearly commanded in Scripture? And let's make sure we're prioritizing that. And what are some things that God has not given clear instruction on that we tend to emphasize is really important in the church, but sometimes it can take priority over the commands of God. That's the passage we looked at originally in Mark 7 is what Jesus accused the Pharisees of. And so when we come into this topic of the Lord's Supper, we really want to spend some time talking through what has God commanded and what has he not. This is a very significant topic. This is one that there's been a lot of division in the history of the church. And it's clearly important, clearly commanded, the Lord's Supper, right, Rob? But I guess, why do you think it is that it can become such a divisive topic where people have such strong convictions that they break fellowship over maybe some things that don't seem to be clear in Scripture?
Yeah, I think because it is a very special thing. It's a sacred thing. And there's a lot of tradition around it. And, some of the traditions are good. That's not that we have to throw everything out, throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Um, but there's been some things that have been, established that are actually unhealthy. And we don't see them in Scripture. But I think because it's such a sacred thing, that we need to be careful. We need to be careful not to just lower it down and just do whatever, however. There's a lot of freedom since there's not much written in Scripture around the how-tos, right? But we don't want to just lose the heart of what God calls us to, and that he would call people like us to his table. Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part of me. And that he would call us into that, to his table, to be with him. I think it's a very sacred thing. And so when we look at 1 Corinthians 11, Paul, gives warning there. He's saying, hey, when you guys come together, you guys don't even come together for the Lord's Supper. You guys are actually getting drunk. And, don't you guys have homes that you can eat at instead of just coming and gorging over here and not waiting for one another? He goes, I'm not going to celebrate you guys. You guys are not taking the Lord's Supper right. And so it seems like there was some error going on there. So maybe that's one of the reasons why people say, hey, we have to do it a certain way or else it'll get sloppy. But sometimes trying to over control things actually loses the heart. Because in the same passage, he says, examine yourself to make sure, and examine the body to make sure that you're not taking this in an unhealthy way. Because if you do, many people have gotten sick and even died. And I don't think we think about that anymore. I think we kind of just, have gotten to the point where we just tack it on at the end of a service or once a month. And I've even heard stories of like, take it on your way out, grab a piece on the way out of the door so that we could get the next group in. We don't want to lower it down to it's just something we have to do. This is something special and sacred that God gave us a glimpse of, to that marriage feast, right? A glimpse of what we'll see and be with him when we dine with him forever. So, I'm just kind of ranting on now, but there's a lot that goes into this. And I think we have to be careful, especially in house churches, not to just do it flippantly, just to be like whatever, but to consider this like a sacred thing that we get to partake with everybody and that we get to be one with him.
Yeah, and you're hitting on the tension there. And I think if I had to guess why a lot of times we get into fight over like little details on like how it's administered or exactly what's that process like or when does it happen in the service, or there could be a variety of like what is the what exactly are the elements? Is it leavened? Is it unleavened? Is it grape juice? Is it wine? Can it be something outside of that? What do you bring it out in? Does it need to be like gold plated? Does it need to be something very a beautiful sort of cup or bowl or plate that the elements are on, or is that not necessary? Some of these things, right? And I think what we are discerning for us is that it seems like it's really more about a heart issue. It's not that those decisions don't matter at all, amongst other decisions around the Lord's Supper, but it seems biblically there is like a heart issue underneath these. And unfortunately, it seems like sometimes we make the mistake of thinking doing things in a very traditional way or a very structured way equals taking it seriously, right? So because we have uh, a very nuanced way of going about the Lord's Supper, and here's how we do it, and we put a lot of thought into it, and we're very like rigid on how we do it. That means that we take the Lord's Supper seriously in the way that God desires us to. Now, it's not that that's not the case, that people that do that don't take it seriously. I'm not saying that, but it's not a one for one. It's not a this equals this. It could be that we have a very rigid way and we've thought through it very well, but we have like bitterness towards a couple other people in the church, and we're taking communion in an unworthy way, like, or that there's disunity in the body, or we aren't being mindful about the other believers, but we've got these forms that make it seem like we're taking it serious, right? And so again, the forms aren't bad, but sometimes the forms can cover up heart issues. It can make it seem like we're okay when our heart isn't right. And this is part of the tension. But I mean, Rob, maybe you could share a little bit about, for us at We Are Church, like we've been wrestling through this. And even as we're talking, preparing this for this video, we're just going, man, we still feel like we have a lot to learn in this area. So hopefully as you're watching this video, you understand Rob and I do not think that we've got this figured out. There's a lot of mystery around this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great place to be, is we're still figuring it out. There is a lot of mystery around it. And we've looked at some things, we've read some things, and it's just really hard to land on one side of what actually is happening there. But there's mystery. I love that you said that, Sean. There's mystery, and we should be okay with that. And we should be thankful that we get to come to the table. Um, for us, I think there's been times when we've actually, kind of taken it lightly. And by God's grace, He's showing us, like, hey, this is a very sacred and special thing. You need to rethink this. And so our leaders started praying and asking God to show us and to give us things to understand. And we're in that process. So I feel like it's going to be a journey for the rest of our lives to marvel at this thing and say, how could God say, this is my body and this is my blood, take it? And we just do it flippantly. I don't want to be there. I don't think anybody wants to be there. It's the heart, right? It's the heart that we want to change as we take communion together.
Yeah, and I think that's to be transparent, right? I feel like for us as elders within We Are Church, we felt like we were being kind of flippant, and that's part of the danger. Like you mentioned earlier, Rob, that in this approach where we're kind of questioning traditions and we're saying, hey, we want to rethink church, we got to be careful that we don't just look at like, hey, anything that was done that isn't in the Bible is a bad idea, and so we're going to stop that. That's not it. It's more nuanced than that. That's easy to just kind of like to say it like that, but that's not actually, it seems like, where the Lord's heart is, because this is a very sacred thing. This is a very significant thing, and we need to be very thoughtful. And so I think, yeah, some of our gatherings, we could just kind of tack it on and do it quick, or I don't know, like use elements that just don't see. Again, there's not something clear in Scripture about here's the elements. This is it has to be wine, or it has to be this type of bread, but I don't know. I guess for us, it's interesting. We still have some convictions where we go, it doesn't seem like it should be soda. It doesn't seem like it should be pizza. I mean, can we definitively say based on this text it can't be? I don't know. I guess there's debate on that, but I don't know, Rob, could you say a little bit about like kind of convictions arising on this that aren't
Yeah,
necessarily in scripture and how that, yeah.
yeah. And I think it's good, right? I think it's good for leaders to re-examine the things that they're doing and how they're doing them. And so one of the convictions that came up was like, if I believe that this is, you know, whether it is or it isn't the actual body and blood of Christ, but this is a special thing. And that's my core belief, that this is a very sacred thing. Um, and I'm not saying that it is or it isn't. I'm just saying it's a special sacred thing. I'm not saying it is his body or isn't, but why would I throw out the rest of the bread after somebody doesn't take? Or why would I pour the rest of the juice down the drain? Why wouldn't I consume it? Why wouldn't I just take it? So now one of the convictions I've had is uh, I'll try to count who's in the room. There's 12 of us, and I'll break 12 pieces of bread and I'll pray over it and I'll thank God. And then if somebody doesn't take, then I'll take that. I won't just disregard it. That's a conviction. There's nothing in scripture that says you have to take it all, but that's just a conviction that I'm wrestling through. I'm like, man, if I really believe and my kids are watching us take this and saying thank you, and then you throw the rest in the trash, what does that really say? You know, that's a conviction for me. I'm not saying you're wrong for throwing it in the trash or whatever. I'm just saying these are things that I'm wrestling through. Um, yeah, that's one of them that comes to mind for me. And then, you know, how often we take it, it doesn't say how often, but we take it often. We take it in our homes. I take it with my wife. You know, we partake together. Um, and we love that. And we love taking communion together. We're so grateful for that.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, it's super helpful. And I guess what we would be encouraging everybody is, I think it's, yeah, it's important as leaders in the church to wrestle through these things, to and even develop like some like general practices, right? It's not like, I think for us at We Are Church, we were kind of erring on the side of like, we don't want to make any traditions, and so yeah, you can use soda. I don't know if people actually use soda, but almost like, hey, if it's not in the text, then we can't like say anything on it. But I don't think that's, I mean, we can come to some decisions, but it seems like the carefulness though is starting to think that that is the primary thing, when primarily God's saying, examine yourself, examine the body, be discerning of, is there disunity in the body? Are we being mindful of the body? If there's conflict going on in this church, we shouldn't be taking communion. We should be getting that right, because that's biblically in First Corinthians there. It seems like that's at the heart of what was going on when they were taking an unworthy matter. It wasn't that they were like, didn't have the right ritual around it. It doesn't seem, right? But there is mystery around this. And so to be careful about not judging other believers too, right? So I think for Rob and myself, as we have certain ways that we approach communion, we got to be careful that we don't go, hey, well, that church, they put, you know, the leftover communion bread in the trash, and so they're like in sin, and I'm wondering if somebody's going to die there. It's like, I don't know. We got to be careful with that, because there can be so much disunity, unfortunately, around this issue, something that Jesus felt is such a beautiful, important thing. And gosh, we like idiots just tend to fight over it. We fight over little nuanced aspects of how we go about this, and we're missing the main point that, yeah, we're partaking in the body and blood of Christ, that we like are unified with him, and he has invited us to this. And so let's hold this high. Let's hold this as sacred and a mystery. And let's also not get too dogmatic or think that it has to be done a certain way, if that's not in scripture, to make sure we prioritize what is clear in scripture. And so, yeah, hope that's helpful. And again, you know, sorry that we don't have it figured out. I know it would be really helpful if we had all the answers on this, but we're still in process. And I hope that's encouraging for you guys as well, that like, I think a lot of people are in process on this, and that's okay. So cool. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.